Here is our lecture on Sub-Saharan, or on Africa. So what we have in Africa, it's obviously a big continent, and so we are going to break this lecture up into several sections. The first section is going to deal with North Africa, which is this area right here. And so North Africa is going to be the area that borders the Mediterranean. And so what we see right here is North Africa, and this whole area right here is going to be bordering the Mediterranean, and so we'll talk about that first. And then the next part of our lecture, we'll talk about West Africa. Then we're going to talk about East Africa, and it's important to know where these areas are. East Africa has two parts. We're going to talk about Oxum, or Ethiopia, and we're also going to talk about the Swahili coast. And then we're going to finish up with an area kind of in East and South Africa called Great Zimbabwe. Let's begin with North Africa. So this story of North Africa, what we're going to do is we're going to go back, and we have talked about the large Abbasid Empire. So the Abbasid Empire stretched from Southwest Asia into a little bit of South Asia, and then of course across North Africa. It was this big empire. But as we've talked about before, the Abbasid Empire starts to weaken because of various reasons, internal decay. And as it's weakening, some of the local emirs or governors of the Abbasid Empire started to use that time of weakness to break away and become independent. And one of these areas is what today we would look at as the area of Egypt. And so these emirs, these Muslim rulers in Egypt, they are going to use the weakness of the Abbasid Empire to break away. And so, they kind of have this semi-independent part of the Abbasid Empire. Now, these emirs, they're always afraid for their lives. They're afraid that somebody's going to assassinate them. Maybe the Abbasids might want to come back and take control of them. And so to protect themselves, what they do is they bring in these Turkish warriors as slaves. And we've talked about this before under the Seljuk Turks. And so we see that here in Central Asia, we have these boys that are captured a long time ago, and then their descendants become known as Mamluks. So these Mamluks from a very early age are trained to be really good warriors, and they're brought in by the emir to kind of protect the ruler from assassination and to enforce his laws. And so these Mamluks, these warrior Turkish slaves, they are not like American slaves. They have power and status, and they're treated as like the emir or the ruler's right-hand man. And so they get all kinds of status and privilege. And eventually, just like the Seljuks, who were Mamluks, did to the Abbasids and overthrew them, the same thing happens here. And so we get these Mamluks who overthrow their owners and their rulers, and they establish themselves as the true rulers of this part of North Africa or Egypt. And so we have this Mamluk kingdom. It's called the Mamluk Sultanate. They are going to be a conquering empire, and as we see, they're going to conquer what is today Libya, and they're also going to come up here in today's Israel and Syria, a little bit of modern-day Turkey, and they're warriors after all, and so they expand their rule. And what's really going to make them powerful is their location. They're at the nexus of three big, huge areas of trade. Up here is Europe. Over here is Asia, and down here is Africa. And they're at the crossroads of if you want to trade from one continent to the other, you have to go through the Mamluk Sultanate. And of course, that makes them the middlemen of trade. And so middlemen are always going to be important, very powerful people in trade routes, because it's where people come together to trade. And if you're a smart ruler, you can tax that trade and control that trade and use that trade to build up your empire and your army. And so their location is going to make them powerful. So now let's fast forward several hundred years and let's talk about their decline. They're to decline for the same reason they rose to power, their location. They're going to decline because they get very wealthy, and when you're wealthy, people want to steal your wealth. In addition to that, they're going to decline because they're surrounded by enemies. So up here in the north, we have the Ottoman Empire. It's another Muslim empire that's expanding at the time, and they want to control this area of trade. And so they're going to invade the Mamluk Empire from the north. Then over here from the east, we're going to have this very large expanding empire in the 1400s. in the late 1400s and the middle and late 1400s, and that's the Mongols. And the Mongols are this huge, powerful army, and they're going to put pressure on the Mamluk sultanate from the east. Now, the Mamluks do beat them back. However, it's going to take them a lot of expenses and a lot of money, and it's going to bankrupt the Mamluk sultanate. And then at the same time, we have Portuguese, who were European explorers at this time, and they are armed with these new gunpowder weapons. And they are going to be putting pressure on the Mamluk Sultanate from the south. And they're going to be trying to control trade routes here in the Red Sea. And so just by being pressured by all of these groups from outside, it eventually is going to lead to the Mamluk Sultanate's decline. Let's now go to West Africa. West Africa, as we see, is right over here. This is the area of West Africa. And let's kind of backtrack and go before 1200 and before really kind of this course begins. And we'll say that West Africa was very isolated from the rest of Europe, from Europe and Asia. It's because they have the Sahara Desert here, right? This whole area right here is the Sahara Desert, and it's just very dry, and there's lots of sand dunes, and very few people live there. And it's very hard to get across the desert and trade with the rest of the world because, you know, the United States is a big country. It could fit inside the Sahara Desert easily. And so it's just so hard to get across. And so as Muslims come in and conquer North Africa, what they bring with them from Central Asia are camels. Camels are from Central Asia, and of course camels can live in the desert, and they can go for long distances without water. And so if I'm a Muslim merchant up here, right, these people are called Moors, M-O-O-R-S. They're just Muslims who live in North Africa, and they're always looking for a way to increase their trade contacts and get richer. And so they've heard, well, maybe there are people that are on the other side of the Sahara Desert that we could trade with, and now we have this new animal that will help us get across the desert. And what they know is they're able to find their way across the desert because there are these oases, and we can see one here, we can see one here, and so there's the oases across the desert that you can, if you can get there, after several hundred miles of traveling in the hot, dry desert, there's a watering hole and you can resupply and keep going across the desert. And so, okay, so now we have camels to get across the desert, but also we see that camels are really hard to load up with trade goods because they have a hump on their back and things will fall off. And so Muslims also bring, these Moors also bring an invention called the camel saddle. And the camel saddle is it's a saddle that's engineered so you can put a lot of trade goods on the camel and it won't fall off. So with the saddle and the camel and finding their way across the desert with these oases, eventually they established what's called Trans-Saharan trade. Trans means across. And so now this is going to be a new overland trade route that connects North Africa to West Africa, and it did not exist before. And so there's all this money to be made, and that is going to change the history and the economy of West Africa. Now, the last thing to say about this slide is that these Moors that are crossing the desert, they know that there's safety in numbers. If you have more people, more camels, they can carry more water, and so maybe you'll be able to survive across the desert if you have greater numbers. Plus, there are also people that here live in the Sahara Desert and this area called the Sahel, which we'll talk more about in a minute, that make their money or make a little extra money by raiding people. And if you have a large, what we call a caravan, a group of people who are merchants, they are clinging together for protection, and you may be able to defend yourself and not get killed. And so we see these caravans travel back and forth, north and south across the Sahara Desert. Now, where are they going? So let's talk about the Kingdom of Ghana. So before Muslims start to come across the desert, we see there's a whole bunch of villages right here in the area called the Sahel. So on our last slide, we had said that this area down here, this is rainforest. Up here, this is the Sahara Desert. In between is this climate region called the Sahel, and it is this semi-dry area. It's not rainforest, it's not Sahara Desert, it's something in between, and so you can grow crops there. You can survive there, and so we see that there's all these villages there, and they're connected because they have the same language and culture, but they're not a kingdom or anything. They become a kingdom, though, because of these raiders we've talked about. Raiders from the Sahara region will come in and they will try to steal and kill the people in this region. And so these villages come together for safety, and they pick the best warrior among them to kind of protect all the villages. and it's a success. And then there's more raids, and so this warrior becomes again looked to protect us. And over time, over the years, this warrior starts to kind of get permanent power, and he becomes a king. And then we have the kingdom of Ghana is born. We have one ruler who's united all of these tribes now for defense, and now he's a king. And this is going to become very important. They're going to become rich because this kingdom is perfectly situated to be a middleman between North Africa and rainforest West Africa. And so they can tax all of this trade. So let's talk about what's happening. What's the trade goods? So from the Mediterranean, we're getting luxury goods that are coming from the Islamic world. They're coming from the Ottoman Empire or the Seljuk Empire. They might be coming from far off, even as far as China over the Silk Roads. So we're talking silks and spices and gems and all of these luxury goods. But also the people of the Mediterranean are bringing with them salt. And they're going to trade that salt, believe it or not, from gold, ivory, and slaves that are down here in the rainforest regions of Africa. Now, you would think, why would you trade salt for gold? Well, the people in the rainforest region of West Africa, it's very hot and humid, and of course your body sweats to try to cool off, and so your body is getting rid of salt constantly. And if you don't replace that salt, you die. And they just didn't have access to a lot of salt mines in West Africa. And so salt was very precious. It was just as precious as gold. And so we see that Africans down here are going to export the things they have that other people want. Gold, ivory from elephants and rhinos, and then of course slaves. This part of Africa is the largest population center of Africa, and so they're going to capture slaves and trade them north in return for, in the Trans-Saharan trade, in return for salt and luxury goods that are coming south. And of course, perfectly situated between these two trade areas is the Kingdom of Ghana. And if you're the middleman, like I said, you can tax that trade and control it and become rich off of it. Here is an example of one of Ghana's trade cities. It's called Timbuktu. You can see it spelled down here. You can see it up here. It's one of these cities that is in this trade zone. So all of these people down here, they've got their trade goods out. Here you can see some little salt slabs. And you're here and you're trying to trade. You're attracting people who are coming from both directions. And if I'm this merchant right here, right, and these Muslims have come in from across the Sahara Desert, and I want their salt and luxury goods so I can trade it for gold, ivory, and slaves, I want them to trade with me and not my rival merchant who's over here. So how can I get the merchants, these Muslim merchants, to trade with me? Oh, I know. If I convert to Islam, then maybe they'll trade with me over somebody else. And so this is one reason that Islam starts to make its way and spread into West Africa. Merchants are converting to attract Muslim merchants. Now, the religion in Africa prior to Islam, it was a whole collection of different things, but more or less, people were animists. They believed that there were nature spirits out there that you could pray to help you out. They were polytheists. There were gods out there. They believed in ancestor veneration, that maybe your ancestors, if you pray to them, they'll protect you. They believed in magic. They believed that amulets could protect them from evil spirits. And so these are the kind of pre-Islamic religions in Africa. And when these Muslims come in, we might convert to attract these Muslim merchants to trade with me. Another group of people that converted were the rulers of Ghana. And they converted because they're fairly new to being kings. And, you know, why should anybody listen to me? I'm just this new king, and in the past they didn't listen to me and my family, so why should they listen to me now? They lacked what we call legitimacy as rulers. So if I'm a leader, I need to get the people to think that I'm powerful and, I should be listened to. And so the rulers of Ghana looked around and they looked at these Muslim merchants and they talked to the Muslim merchants, and these Muslim merchants talked about how big the Islamic empires are to the north and how powerful they are. And so the rulers of Ghana thought, if we convert to Islam, then everybody by association is going to think we're part of that powerful base too, that if Muslims are powerful far off, then if I'm a Muslim, I must be powerful here. And so it's kind of power by association. And so we see that this gives them some legitimacy. So we see the upper class of Ghana society is converting to Islam, either for trade or for legitimacy of power. Eventually, the kingdom of Ghana is going to be attacked. Now, and so the very reason it was created, people coming together to protect themselves against people raiding in from the desert, we're going to see that process is still happening, but even greater now because the people of Ghana have all of this money. And so if you have money, people are going to want to come and steal it. And so raids from the desert continue to increase, and eventually it just becomes so expensive that they just fall apart as a kingdom, and the kingdom of Ghana ceases to be. Here we see a picture of some of the trade goods I've talked about. Obviously, this is the ivory that was made from elephant tusks, and people wanted that because you could carve it into amazingly beautiful jewelry or artwork. Down here, we see some of the kings of Ghana. This is a more current picture of people who live in Ghana, but look at all this solid gold jewelry they have, and so if you see that, you want to trade for it. And down here, we see the salt that was coming across the Trans-Saharan trade routes from North Africa down into West Africa. And so you wouldn't think it, but yes, people would be happy to trade some of the salt for some of the gold. Now, after Ghana falls apart, we see that there's still trade there, and in trade there's money to be made, and money creates kingdoms. And so the next kingdom that arises in West Africa is the kingdom of Mali. So we see Ghana first and then Mali second, and it's easy to remember, they go in alphabetical order, G, M. Now, and if you know the story of Ghana, you pretty much know the story of Mali, if we're going to talk in broad strokes here. And so Mali is going to make it's a West African kingdom. It's going to make its power based off controlling Trans-Saharan trade. It is the middleman again between the rainforest area of West Africa and these Muslim merchants coming in from North Africa. And so they're going to tax the trade, become very wealthy. The trade goods are the same that we've talked about before. And even the people that convert to Islam are the same. The merchants in Mali will convert to attract trade to Islam, and so will the kings of Mali as well. All right, so let's talk about the most important king of Mali that you might need to know, and his name is Mansa Musa, and we see a drawing of him here. Mansa Musa had already converted to Islam, but all Muslims, once in their life, it's one of the 5 pillars, you have to take a Hajj, or a trip to Mecca, at least once in your life. And so he's like, well, let me go do that. And so he brings hundreds of his followers, because he has to travel in style, after all, he's a king. And of course he's going to bring lots of gold with him. And so he's going to take his Hajj to Mecca. And so he goes across the desert from oasis town to oasis town, and eventually he makes its way to North Africa, and then he goes all the way across North Africa, down the Arabian Peninsula to Mecca. And he, circles the Kaaba, and he's, excited about it. And we see that he's so incredibly wealthy, he's carrying all of this gold, because that is one of the things he trades in, that he's actually going to destroy the economy of every city he goes to. He doesn't do it on purpose. It's just, one of the pillars of the faith is that you're supposed to give alms to the poor. And so anytime he goes into this new city, he and his retainers and his court, they just throw out all of these gold coins along the way and shower the people with gold. And because he's giving to the poor, this is a thing you're supposed to do. But also it shows everybody his wealth and power, and so it makes him look really good. And so all of this gold just kind of collapses the economy, because now everybody has all this money. It causes inflation. Nobody really knows what the price of anything should be. And so it's this crazy, insane story of just how wealthy this guy is. Now, when he gets to Mecca, he's so overwhelmed by all of the Muslims from across the world that have come here, and they're exchanging goods and ideas and crops and philosophy, and he's just overwhelmed by this religious experience. So by the time he makes it all the way back to Mali, he's very excited about his faith. And so he really wants Islam to be the faith of everybody in his empire. And so he's not going to force the people to convert, but he's going to sponsor Islam, which means he is going to try to promote its growth. And so what he does is he builds at his own expense, he's going to build beautiful mosques for people to pray in, and he thinks if they can come to this mosque in this big structure and pray in it, they're going to be impressed by the religion, so they might convert. Or he's also going to open up free schools where people can get their kids trained in the language, Arabic language, so they can read the Quran. And of course, if I'm a poor person, maybe I can't afford to get my kid educated to read and write, but if the government's going to offer this free school, I'm going to send my kid to this madrasa, this school, and as he's learning to read and write, he's going to learn about the Quran, and so maybe people will convert that way. And so here's yet another way Islam is spreading, through government sponsorship. Here is an example of one of the mosques that is built in Mali. It is not like a mosque you'd see someplace else. This mosque is kind of a great example of how Islam changes as it goes around the world. So in most mosques around the world, you see these towers, and they're called minarets. And what it's supposed to do is this big tall tower, a Muslim holy person is supposed to climb up to the top of the tower and yell out from this big height that it's time to pray. Because Muslims are supposed to pray 5 times a day, and so this is how everybody knows it's time to pray. So he'd yell out something in Arabic like, it's time to pray. And people would then, okay, come to the mosque or stop what they're doing and pray. And so, that's what we see here. But in all other countries, it's made from stone or marble or granite. But we don't have that here. It's on the border of the Sahara Desert. But we do have is sand. We do have some watering holes, and we have mud. And so these mosques are made from mud, from sand and water that's been mixed together. We put some straw in it. We put a few logs in it. Logs are very precious. There's not a lot of trees. It's so dry here, so we can't make it like as a wooden mosque. And so we kind of pack it together. It bakes in the hot, hot sun, and you get this kind of brick-like substance. And so here we see a great example of cultural diffusion, of Islam making its way into West Africa, but kind of adjusting to the local circumstances. The other thing I wanted to talk about on this slide is the unique kind of makeup of Islam in West Africa. So like I said, before Islam comes to West Africa, people were animists. They believed in nature spirits. They believed in ancestor veneration. They believed in magic, that you could magically say something or have a ceremony and something would happen. They believed that you could wear protective amulets against evil spirits. Women did not have to be veiled here traditionally. And so when Islam comes in, the people will adopt Islam. They like the idea of a single God you can pray to. That's very spiritual. It gives me joy. They like the idea of heaven you can go to. That's called salvation. But they don't want to give up all of their culture. And so women don't become veiled. And we still see them, people still venerating and worshiping ancestors and believing in magic. And so we have this kind of new syncretic Islam that has aspects of traditional Islam, but still also aspects of their culture before. And so it's kind of this new, unique version of Islam here in West Africa. Right, that's it for part 1 of this lecture. When we come back, we're going to talk about East Africa and then eventually South Africa.